Hello, everyone. This is another story from Know the Bible, Plain and Simple, story number 7 about Jacob. If you haven't done so already, read Genesis chapter 32. Other chapters as well, if you can, if you've got time, but especially 32. When we talk about Jacob, we're really talking about today Jacob turning into Israel. Israel becomes the name of not only his family, but the country that comes from his family, which we hear about in the Old Testament. But for today's story, we kind of start off where Jacob had tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright and out of the blessing of his father Isaac. Esau gets word of being tricked out of this blessing, and Esau wants to kill him. So Jacob has to leave the inheritance that's been given to him and run off to a faraway land to his uncle Laban, his mother's brother. On the way, he rests overnight, lays his head on a rock, and a famous dream he has, what they call it Jacob's ladder, where he sees a stairway to heaven with angels coming up and down. And God speaks to him. God blesses him, and he promises that his family will multiply, and he promises that all the land around him will belong to his family, and God promises to be with him and watch over him always. He makes up to his uncle and falls in love with his cousin Rachel and wants to marry her. And as Jacob has tricked others, he gets tricked into actually marrying the older sister, Leah. His uncle does let him also then eventually marry the one that he wanted to, Rachel. After he has many children with both of his wives and servants of both of his wives, it's finally time for Jacob to go home. He has accumulated much, and he is ready to leave Laban behind and return to his family and to his homeland. As he does, at one point he crosses the Jabbok River, sends all of his family and possessions and everything that he has across, stays behind on the other side, and that night he wrestles with God, with an angel of God, with God himself. If you wrestle with an angel of God, you're wrestling with God himself. And in the midst of that wrestling, his hip is put out of socket, but nonetheless, he will not let go. And so it's kind of determined that he got to win that match. And the angel God himself renames him, says, "You will no longer be called Jacob, but you will be called Israel." And from that time forward, that's the name that he has, and not only him, but his family after him. Finally makes it over and meets up with his brother Esau, and they are at peace with one another, which is great, beautiful. And sometime after that, finally has his 12th son with Rachel, who dies in childbirth. And after that, we kind of pick up the story of the 12 kids, but that'll be next week's story. That we look at those. So that's the kind of need to know items. Interesting items all along. I think interesting is the name change. Jacob means deceiver. Israel means one who strives with God. Neither one of them seem that flattering, and yet the meanings are important. Where before he was the trickster. Now he's wrestled with God, but he has won. He has prevailed. Also interesting is, he goes back to see Esau, and by the time he goes back to see Esau, both of them are very wealthy men, and in fact, probably more wealthy than their father, from whom they were trying to fight to get the blessings and the inheritance. And in fact, Jacob has so much that he gives Esau all these great gifts when he gets back, probably more than what he stole from him in getting the inheritance in many ways. And also interesting is that the 12 sons of Israel, as I mentioned, will end up being the 12 tribes of Israel. And those names will stick for generations and generations to come. So it'll be fun to watch them as their stories play out in the stories to come in the weeks ahead. In terms of Christ, I think the biggest thing with Christ that gets me both on the way to his uncle Laban and on the way home, where he sleeps, one with Jacob's ladder, the other one with wrestling, is this verse from Romans chapter 5, verse 8. God showed his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Here Jacob is running away from this great act of trickery and deceit. Talk about a sinner of sinners here, and yet God loves him nonetheless, and he blesses him, and he promises him all these things. And then on the way back out of this life, God lets him wrestle him, and God lets him win. Our God, we see, and we will continue to see, and it'll be hard to see sometimes in the Old Testament, but we'll see it plainly on the cross when we get there. Our God is a God who's not interested in putting us in our place, but rather raising us up, even if it means his own defeat. He is willing to be defeated in order to give us the victory. That's it for today's story. I encourage you in your household with someone else. What stands out to you from this story? What's your favorite part, or what part do you have a question about? Share with each other. Talk about it a little bit, and then pray for those things that are on your hearts and minds. Many things to pray for all of these days, and close with the Lord's Prayer as well. And I look forward to seeing you with story number 8, where we'll look at the 12 sons and especially Joseph. Take care.